Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking True, where I have the great good fortune of interviewing mystics, near death experiences, non dual teachers, and people who are waking up to the truth of who they are. So today I have a special guest. His name is Sunya. He's a non dual teacher and he has his own channel here on YouTube. And we're just going to dive into the theme, discover what is already here. So, Sonia, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's great to have you with me today.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
So, do you want to just cut, everybody loves a good story, right? Do you want to, while we realize, you know, none of us have the story, do you want to just briefly maybe define or describe what happened in terms of your own self recognition? What did that look like?
This is probably the hardest thing to do because as you may recognize yourself, it is simultaneously the journey that is a step to nowhere is kind of the destruction of the story itself. So to kind of recount that, as you say, it does come with a Himalayan-sized asterisk. Um, that really what occurred didn't cause the dissolution of self. And I think the risk that I've seen myself personally going back in so-called time is that the stories, mind loves stories, right? So mind loves to sort of compare and say, oh, that's interesting. Did I have that? Or if I didn't have that, the mind will say, oh, I've not realized quite as much as this person because they've experienced something I haven't. So it
Mm,
can lead to all these comparisons of, why it occurred or did this cause this and that. So with all that said, I don't think any of this particularly, it has interest, obviously, to the mind, and the so-called separate selves will find interest in it.
mm,
But I don't think there's any deeper meaning in it so much. It's kind of because the character that went through this doesn't exist.
right.
So with that said, um, the I mean, essentially, it's kind of a clash of two paths. So I was on the sort of materialistic path, as many people in the Western world were on. And I was trying everything that I could to be happy, like most people are, right? Um, and I tried many different things over the course of time, experiences, relationships, substances. I made millions of pounds or dollars in my business. I became so-called successful at sport, and I did all of these things. But whenever I got to the top of the so-called mountain, there was actually nothing there. There was a deep sense of, well, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the same time that this was going on, it wasn't like it was a sudden realization. At the same time, there's this twin path going on of sort of the spirituality side, even though I didn't initially even recognize it as such. I was, the character, so to speak, was taught, to meditate at school from an early age. So that'd be like 4 decades ago. Um, then there were things like, an out of body experience um, when I was very sick in bed and I was walking around my room and I was doing very ordinary things in the room. So I was studying the posters on the wall. I went up to the keys in the door of the room and jangled the keys just to say, oh, this, yeah, because you don't do that in a dream, right? That's a very normal thing. And then I thought, I'll look and see what time it is. So I had a digital watch at the time. I looked at my watch and it just said 0000, and it wasn't moving. I thought, this is super weird. So then I turned around to the bed and I was on the bed. And then when I pushed myself on the bed, I kind of woke up. So there were things like this that were going on in tandem. I then, in one, when there was this big sort of pivotal moment in business where everything kind of came tumbling down, um, I went down this sort of Buddhist path and this whole, the power of now and all this kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I actually studied very closely with a Buddhist monk up here in Scotland. And we became very good friends. So it was kind of interesting. I was teaching him business and he was teaching me meditation and Buddhism. We would go out for meals and, come around to my house and things like that. And then during that stage, there was something that happened during meditation that I only recognized a few years later as exactly what it was. But it was this sense that, and bearing in mind at this point, I think I'd read one spirituality book, which is The Power of Now, by Eckhart Tolle. I wasn't watching YouTube video. I wasn't pursuing anything. It was more just, I'm just meditating. It's, I guess, a seeking of truth in some sense. But I didn't know any of the lingo or any of the, there was no expectation. But during one of these meditations, there was literally nothing happening. So it was a no thought, no experience. It's difficult to describe, but it felt like death and it was okay. Now, at that moment, there was this huge sort of inrush and simultaneously outrush from the top of my head. And the only way I can describe it is it just felt like the universe was pouring into my brain. I mean, I was like shaking and it was exhilarating, but it was also like, what the heck is going on? Um, and I mentioned it in my meditation group the next week, and a few people looked at me a bit weird, but nobody really, I was looking for like, what's going on here? What is this? Anyway, a few years went by, and so I was, learning more, and then people say, "Oh, that's probably a crown chakra thing. It's this energy thing." And then I studied read a lot and consumed almost everything by Adyashanti, who's a American former Zen monk. And he described exactly the same experience that he had, which was the beginning of his awakening, where he was a religious meditator every day, hours every day in the Zen tradition, been hit on the back with a stick.
Yes.
And one day he just thought, I can't do this. I cannot do this. And he gave up. And at that point he experienced the same thing that I did. And for a time there was um a longing for repeating the experience. I kind of got stuck in trying to go back to something, recreate something. And what I call this whole flip-flopping in spirituality, like, oh, I had it, I've lost it. Like,
Yes.
what's the right thing to feel now? Should I be thinking, oh, I've dropped out of it again now? Am I,
Yes.
you know, am I pretending? I feel like maybe I was pretending before because I don't feel like that now. And yeah, fast forward a few years, I guess, towards the end, or never the end, but the sort of latest chapters of this story of this non-existent character. Um, I was at a swimming pool watching my daughter swim at a swimming class, and suddenly it just became obvious that everything was the same. So the substance that made the water, the substance that was my daughter, and the substance that was the tiles next to the pool, everything was the same. Now, it wasn't an intellectual thing, it was a very visceral thing. Everything, and this, obviously, this is a common theme, but all of this is beyond mind. Like it's beyond mind and it's beyond description and it's beyond words, but we still try.
Yes.
Um, and for anybody that's experienced any of these things, you'll know that it's just a knowing of it. But the best way that I can describe it is that prior to this, every object would have either a coldness about it or a potential threat but not threat, but a low level disinterest to me,
Hmm.
or from me. Like, oh, that's just a fence. Like, that's got nothing to do with me, or that's a pencil, whatever. But after this, everything had a luminosity about it. It had a benevolent ambivalence. So what I mean by that is not ambivalent like, oh, I could care less, but everything is benevolent to you regardless of what it is or who you are or what you do. Um, and I sought to sort of verify that on the drive home. So I was looking at houses, and houses had it, cars had it, the steering wheel had it. And I even went outside when I got home, and there was bird poop on the back step. And I was looking at that. I was like, this is so weird. Like everything now has that.
Hmm.
Um, and then again, after that, there was this sense of, I don't know, not, I can't, it's hard to put it into time, but um, this this understanding that I was everything, um, which people sometimes get confused by, and they think, oh, that's such an ego thing, like you're just saying you're everything. But it's more that everything is I, rather than I, the person, I am all this. So that was a weird thing. So even on things like dog walks, I would feel, as the grass, I would feel steps walking on me as I was walking the dog. It's hard to describe.
Yes.
Um, and as a result of that, the it was pretty obvious that there was no body or no person here. So it's kind of this simultaneous um, being everything, but also being nothing. So you're nothing in sense of, in sense of the person. So that's the kind of shortened version. I mean, obviously within that, there's, long bouts of, self-inquiry and meditation and on other things and unfoldings. Of course, it never ends. The metaphor that I like to use is, when the universe was one star old, it was perfect, and whole, but it was still becoming perfect. When it was 1,000 stars, it's the same. So these little things always feel final, but it's the never ending mystery. Um, so yeah, ultimately, as I said at the beginning of this story, it really just on becoming what I never was and seeing what I have always been, um, which is like the hugest cosmic joke that
Yes.
there is, right? I mean,
Yes.
you set off on this journey with like, a compass to decide which way you're going to go, with a name, with signposts, because you think you want to say, am I at this stage? Is this right? Am I off track? And you end up back where you started, but there's no person, there's no signpost, and there's no compass. And so at, at the deepest level, nothing has changed. But to another level, that like everything's changed.
Yes. 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 I mean, I always um, think about what Bhagavan Nityananda of Ganeshpura used to say. He called it the path of return, because we're driven. If you have some kind of glimpse of the self, or whatever you want to describe that, right? That fires you up to go on this journey, and you, like you said, you're looking for signposts, and you're looking for levels, and you think you're getting there wherever there is. It's just this huge cosmic joke, because at a certain point, seeking almost becomes distasteful, which is certainly what happened in my story. I just got so fed up with the whole seeking game. And then I recognized that seeking itself was the obstacle. And with that recognition, everything just collapsed. The whole seeking, everything just collapsed. And then, you get to see what the weight of that looks like and feels like. I mean, there's a huge weight to that, right? This kind of accumulating these ideas and concepts and beliefs about who you think you are, and where you're getting to, and all of that. And it's a relief when that falls away. And I love what you shared about seeing yourself, everything at the swimming pool, because I had a similar experience. I was just sitting at home. I just made coffee, and I put some creamer into my coffee, and then I put the creamer back on the opposite counter, and I just sat there, and all of a sudden it was like I had this amazing love for this creamer, and then I recognized that every single thing that I was looking at was the same, and I was included within that. And I couldn't. It was like I couldn't identify the separation anymore. It's really hard, as you said, to put this into words. But then that would show itself in dreams. I'd have lucid dreams where I was the same energy as all the forms within the dreams, and that then continued in the waking state. So I always find it fascinating the way I like to say the self wakes up to itself, but even then, with these words, it's really, but it's just fascinating the way it reveals itself, or the mystery reveals itself, however you want to put it. And it's so unique for each and every one of us. And, we get to that point where we realize, actually, I don't exist. I never existed. And that's when I think that, that really what happens is that's when you really begin to live your life, fully, rather than being invested in seeking.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening today and where you're at today?
Well, today let's talk about the weight. There's just something I wanted to say there about the weight of seeking. And because one of the things that I've seen people get hung up on, and it tripped me up, was this whole let go, right? It's that a lot of spiritual teachers will say, oh, you just need to let go. You just need to stop seeking, and you are already this. And there's a time when that is like infuriating to hear.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
the mind is, I always call it, the mind is a separation machine. It dislikes reality. It wants more, it wants better, it wants different, and it wants action. And this tripped me up for the longest time. So when I kind of, heard that whole surrender or let go, there's different ways of doing it, right? So I think before any kind of seeking takes place, before the spiritual journey takes place, people are trying to swim upriver, right? We say river is life. And they think, I can control it, I can go against it, I can shape it to my will, and I can do this, and I can swim up there and I'll find what I want, and it will give me that lasting happiness, right? Even though we know that the happiness is always temporary and is really only because of ending of the desire, not because of what you actually get that you desired. It's because you at that moment lack a desire, but we make the wrong connection and think, oh, it's because of what I was desiring that I've now achieved it. But if it were that, then it would never end, right? But moments after fulfilling the desire of, chocolate or drugs or sex or wine or whatever it is, there's nothing wrong with these things, but people seek those out to fulfill, then it kicks off again. It's like, well, I need to do that again, or that's not good enough. So I think when people are still in materialist world and they see themselves as separate individuals, like I did, they'll try all these different things, and they'll try swimming upriver against life. Then if they go into the spiritual realm, even if they're not pursuing it actively, like, it's that they've seen the light in a sense that there's something missing, And they might get to that stage where they hear that phrase, let go, or, stop seeking, or surrender. And what I did, and I've seen other people do, is they stand in the river, right? They say,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm not doing anything,"
Yes.
but they're actively doing nothing, right?
Hmm.
So there was a period of months after one of these episodes I explained to you that I couldn't operate on a human level. Like I was unable to work or really do anything. But really, I was standing in the river of life. Like I wasn't trying to shape it, but I was not going with the flow. And that's the difference. You can look like you're doing nothing by standing in the river, but you're actually resisting. It's an active surrender.
Hmm.
Whereas the letting go that needs to be done is not a doing. And that's why it's so infuriating to the mind, because it wants something to do. Um, but it's literally just you let go. Like it's the same. Another metaphor that I found helpful is, when a guy falls down a well, it's a bottomless well. And the first hour that he falls down the well, he's like this, he's scrabbling. Oh my God, there's nothing to grab onto. I'm disorientated. This is a totally new situation from where I was at the top of the well. I'm zooming down. I don't know what's at the bottom. There's all these fears and unknown, and he's struggling. And then you see a picture of him a week later, because it's a bottomless well, and he's just lying back like this.
Yes.
And that takes time. Um, that takes time, and I think it's this again. Words are kind of stupid and not good enough, but it's this sort of what they call embodiment, don't they? Of you can. I think most people will get it on the mind. I think most people in spirituality, once they've been in it for any amount of time, understand concepts mentally and intellectually.
Hmm.
But then it needs to be felt at like the heart level. Like you need to have really, whatever it is. I mean, there's no right or wrong. I don't even want to give an example, but it needs to be felt at the heart level. Something has to have moved the heart so that you just know. It's not like I know the book. It's like you become the truth that you understood mentally.
Hmm.
And then I think it's that embodiment phase or stage, which is, well, okay, now that you know that, and now that you feel that in your heart and you've been moved in that way, how do you now operate in the world? And are you living from that? Um, so I love my metaphors, as you probably know already, but the best way that I can describe how things are today is there's two metaphors. One is those inflatable men that you get outside forecourts, mainly in the
Yes.
USA. Those things. So it's kind of just like that. Like it, something makes you move, like makes this thing move. Um, and then the other metaphor is the whack-a-mole game at an arcade. That it's literally just I'm not planning stuff. There's no planning. There's no real strategy. There's definitely no desire or want or need for anything. But there's not a hermit life or type existence either. It's if something pops up, it gets whacked. Excuse me. If something needs dealt with,
Hmm.
um, it gets done. And I think that there's sort of three. I believe there's three drivers now. So there's devotion, which is a devotion to the truth that I've known, which is doing things like this. So helping others
Hmm.
maybe experience the truth or deepen their understanding. There's a duty to the human aspect, not just myself, but my physicality, the mind, but a duty to family, to society. And then I think the third is desire, that those human being desires that maybe come from, you know, a sense of lack, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just kind of recognizing what's what. Um, but just in the sense that the fence kind of is always loving and openly smiling, or any object, I just feel the same way. Like there's just never a problem, even though, you know, if I stub my toe, I might swear or whatever, or if something in business isn't going great, like, oh no, it's not going great, but it's never, it's the background that, you know, what I know I am is not bothered. Like how, I mean, how could it be, how could I be bothered about any of that stuff? You know, it's just, um, it's all part of it. I think that's the other thing is that there's only all that there is. Like there's only all that there is, and everything is in that. So there's no wrongness. There's no, oh, I've slipped out of it. Oh, you know, it's not a state. Um, it doesn't have to be maintained because, like you say, there's that weight, right? So when people have these stories, it's like you carry around all this stuff, and then you have different lenses as well. So you know, you might carry around a book about childhood, or a book about what you are as an employee, or a book about family. And you carry all these things around, and you end up almost crippled under the weight of all this stuff
Mm-hmm.
that you only really, it's only maintained or even prolonged because you actually go back to it, and you can quite as easily just put it down. And then the
Yeah.
lenses are linked to the stories. You know, you think, oh well, that if that's who I am, therefore I'm going to look at things this way. So you end up with all these lenses bringing your head down, so you can't quite see the truth. Your back is arched because of the weight of all the stories. And the, I mean, the part for me that aided me in seeing that clearly was, when I stepped off the bike. So I was seriously into bike racing. I would cycle 200 miles a week. I would be out on my bike pretty much every day of the year, no matter what the weather. And chances, you know, in Scotland is saying something. Um, and over a period of years, I became amateur, serious amateur cyclist. That was my identity, and everything that I did and everything that I thought about was geared towards building that and sustaining that. And then when I got to this world championship event, amateur world championship event, and realized this, what the heck am I doing? Like, what? This is crazy. And I just got off the bike, and that just identity just went like instantly. And as that had gone so quickly, everything else followed pretty swiftly after, because it just made me see that, oh yeah, that's just something that the mind said to itself. It's just stories, it's just books that you're carrying and lenses that you're looking through. You know, it's not reality at all.
Yes, yes, yes. And you know, you made a good point with respect to the, seeking game, because I think what happens is that the ego can become or the identification with being a spiritual seeker, let's put it like that, can become so identified with that. There's often, and there's a feeling of accumulation. You know, you've done all these retreats, you've, read all these books, you know this, you know that, you know about the chakras, or, whatever the story is around all of that. And then there can be some fear around, kind of dropping that or seeing through all of that because of the time that's been invested. It's a bit like, and you throw good money after bad, as they say, when you keep having a car repaired that
Yeah.
isn't, you know what I mean? So there can be that. There can be this fear about, well, who am I, or what is left if I stop investing time with this spiritual community, or with my studies, or whatever that story is.
Mm.
And then also, with respect to what you said about dropping seeking, used to drive me mad as well, because it's like, how do you do that, especially when you invested in being a spiritual seeker. But you know what I always say is you know, just let it run its course, because if you try ahead of kind of burning that out, so to speak, if you try and sort of hold yourself, no, I'm stopping seeking that, I'm stopping seeking. It's like you said, you are holding a position which is a position of resistance with respect to what is and what is unfolding right now. So I think you have to be natural. You have to let things flow easily and easefully. But at a certain point, it was certainly that way in my story, that there was this clear seeing that seeking wasn't it, and it wouldn't take me anywhere. It wouldn't, it wouldn't present me with this kind of gold cup of enlightenment, or however you want to. And I think this is it's a common story with many seekers, that they feel they've invested a lot of time and effort and energy, and they don't want to stop because there's fear around what that might look like.
Yeah, it becomes a subtle form of materialism, basically, but in a spiritual sense, so rather than collecting, relationships or diving into substances or experiences, then it becomes, oh, well, it's different because it's spiritual. But the moment that, the moment that you reach for something, you are reinforcing separation. You're saying, I don't have something. But they do say, I don't know if there was ever been attributed to anybody, but there's the quote that seeking does not lead to enlightenment, but only seekers become enlightened, or only those who seek become enlightened. But I mean, obviously, enlightenment is a whole paradox in itself, because enlightenment does to the person like fire does to a match. You don't, the match doesn't get the fire. It doesn't get to keep the fire. In fact, it just annihilates the idea of what you thought you were. Like the metaphor that I use, I always try and come up with these metaphors that sort of get closest to the truth. And one is this prism idea. You know, the cover for the Pink Floyd album with
Yeah.
the beam of light, and then you have the prism, so white light going in, prism, and then a rainbow going out. So the idea is that there is only all that there is, and that is, you call it whatever you want. Every word is not good enough, right? It doesn't do justice to it. But let's just say it's the light of awareness. You could call it consciousness or spirit or God or all that there is or whatever. But there's only one. So this light is everywhere, because it's everything, and everything is within that, and everything is created by that, and anything that's observing anything is also that. But when you look into a room, like if I look at your location, you look at mine, we can't physically pinpoint and point to light, but it's there, right? Because it's so dispersed. But then it gets narrowed. So I see the narrowing as the body. Okay, so the body is a narrowing of consciousness. You have this global, universal consciousness, and then you have this narrowing. So now it's a white beam of light. Then it goes into the prism. Now, the prism in this analogy is the mind, because the mind, to say, is a separation machine. So it takes this consciousness, separates it, and it starts saying, okay, that is a tree, that is a fish, that is Julie, that is Sonia, that is YouTube. It defines, separates all of that stuff. But if you remove any of these aspects, the light is still, right? So if you remove the prism of the mind, it doesn't affect the light. Like the light is that. So all of the rainbow of experience is still just the light of consciousness. If you remove the narrowing, it doesn't affect the consciousness. It still is that. So it kind of helps to sort of try and understand this universal nature to everything that, and of course it's easier said than done, that there is literally nowhere to go, and nothing to seek. And the moment that you try and reach, or you know, because they have two paths, and they talk about two paths in spirituality, don't they? They're an outward path where you devote to a god or a guru or a practice, or an inward path where you investigate the nature of yourself, so self-inquiry. But both of those set up a situation where it's assumed that there's a separate you doing it, and that it's assumed that there's separation to what you're trying to so-called get. But I think the reason those two paths exist, and all the practices in each one, like the outward and the inward, is because ultimately they lead to the same place, which is the collapse of the separation. So, you know, going out to God, for example, devotion to God, getting closer to God, and then eventually, oh, God just is all that there is, and I am that. Oh, right, it's gone. And obviously the inward inquiry is the same. What am I? I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. I observe the thoughts, you know, and eventually that can lead to dissolution of the, you know, the idea or the illusion of a separate self as well. And then you have the direct path, of course, where people just, oh, just realize, just, you know, you are this already. Which suggests that none of those actions are required. But that's where it kind of, it gets complex in spirituality. I don't think, this is where the mind like just fails. Like, you know, I don't think there's a causality between doing those things and what happens. The way I see it is, it's like a firework. You know, once that spark has been lit, that spark of inquiry, which comes from itself, because you are not separate to the universe. I always tell people, go just as an experiment this weekend, just go and live outside of the universe for the week. Like you know, you can't do it because you are the universe. So that spark of seeking or wanting truth comes from itself. But once it's lit, it's going. Like, you know, it might have a longer fuse, you might have a short fuse, there might be no fuse, and suddenly it's bang. I mean, you know, I had a chap reach out to me a few weeks ago, a golfer, professional golfer, not into spirituality, was not seeking anyway, who was quite upset and disorientated because he just woke up and realized he wasn't a separate person, which many people in spirituality are like, oh, I want that. How do I get that way? So he wasn't looking for it. He didn't want it. He was in a position of like what's happening to me? But it wakes up to itself. You know, I always say, like, you know, the cherry blossom. Every bud on the cherry blossom tree blossoms. Some are quick, some are slow, some fall and make more trees, but they eventually blossom. You know, some get eaten by an animal that poops and makes seeds, but eventually it will, you know, awaken to itself, as you said. Yes,
yes. And sometimes, you know, what happened again in this story here is it was a sentence. I heard it was Muji, you know, I'm not a follower of Muji, but he was conducting a retreat, and I just said, let me just go see what this is about. You know, it was in India. And he said, recognition of the self is the self, honor that recognition. And so it was like, you know, there was this clear seeing that every time I'd listened to, you know, a master yogi or an enlightened teacher speak or point to the truth, something in me would kind of vibrate and pulsate and recognize the truth within what they were saying, right? And it had always been that way. I would often also hear them their responses inside me before they actually came out. So there was this clear seeing that there was only one self, and I was that. And the drive to keep seeking came out of that recognition, but I hadn't realized that what I was seeking for outwardly was already here as this. So it was really this one sentence, and that kind of, I guess, was the nail in the coffin, as I could put it like that. And sometimes that happens too. It just, I don't know. Again, maybe, the seeking burns itself out, and then all that's needed is one sentence or one small, moment of seeing clearly, and then it's like game over.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be so simple and so clear. It is so simple and so clear when it is seen, but prior to that, it can feel like, oh, you're never getting there wherever there is, and it can be very frustrating, really frustrating. And I'm sure you had that. I had that too in terms of my story. Or maybe I need to meditate more, or maybe I need to do more retreats, or more japa, or read more books, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's really much more simple than that, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it kind of needs to happen until it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have to be very, very honest with yourself.
Yes.
Because there was a period where, like what I explained earlier on today with us together, I'd kind of grasped a lot of that mentally. So I'd taken that and said, oh, I'm just not going to meditate. Like, there's no point. Like, I'm out. Like, I'm not meditating. I'm not reading stuff anymore. I'm out of the spiritual. Like, this is pointless. Like, I see now, I already am that, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't a felt sense though. It wasn't, and again, it's difficult, but it's like a hum. I've heard people say it's like tinnitus, but in a good way. Like it's just always there. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
um
It's like a throbbing is, yeah, sometimes a hum, but it's almost like this vibration, like a pulsation or a throbbing, or yeah,
yeah,
or like.
yeah, yeah. So I think back at that time I was, I would drift in and out. I was still at the flip flopping stage, and I think I kind of spat the dummy out to be honest, and was like, well, I don't need to seek, I don't need to do the practices, which I know we're saying now is on the absolute level is true, but I think I wasn't at that depth at that point. And like going back to what I said before, I knew intellectually and maybe experienced some of it at a heart level, but it wasn't it 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 just wasn't who I was at that point. There hadn't been a full, if we go back to the match was still there. It might have been singed, and oh yeah, I'm gone now, but
Mm-hmm.
whereas now it's like there's not even dust, like it's just
Yeah.
everything's gone in the wind. Um, but even so, I still meditate occasionally. If you're drawn to, um, if you're drawn to it, then I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think because we're not, again, this is where it gets complicated because we go back to there's no doer. I've heard Francis Lucille tell this idea. It's like a little kid with a plastic steering wheel in the passenger seat of a car. Like, they think they're controlling it, but they're not. You're not
No.
controlling it. So, the choice to meditate or to quit seeking or to continue or go to I mean, we can't even control a sneeze. Like how do we, I mean, you can't stop a sneeze or a blink. So why would you think that any of all of this is actually malleable by one tiny finite perceived separate entity. It's
Yes.
crazy. But
Yeah.
when you're in, when you still see as that and you still operate as a separate self, of course, you're still in that. You're still the kid with a steering wheel, like, no, 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 I am definitely doing this. um, so yeah,
Yeah.
you feel like you should do something, even if the doing is the doing of stopping.
Yes, yes, and I'm with you. I don't have the same kind of rigorous meditation and chanting practices that
Mm,
I held on to for years. But occasionally I will sit and meditate. And but a kind of a deeper calling for me was always to go into the silence within my own being and to just see how far, how deep does that go.
hmm hmm
But yeah, I mean, if I'm led to meditate or it feels like the right thing to do, I'll sit and meditate for a little while. But it's what I recognize is that I'm not looking for anything from it. All of that. It's just this natural kind of outflowing or expression or whatever you want to call it. With respect to honoring the self or honoring the truth. Uh,
Yeah,
of who I am, and there's a real sweetness to that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I think it's just allowing, everything to be, as it is. You're not interfering, you're not looking for anything. Um, Prior to this, I remember I used to, like yourself, I used to have a quite a regimented meditation practice. And at the time I had, my kids were pretty young. I think they were 1 and 3. So I would have to get up at 5 a.m. in the morning to try and get quiet time in, right? And at this period, I need to do this because it was mind, right? Outcome. I don't
Mhm.
have it. I lack something. If I do this, classic, so
Yes, yes,
oversimplified. If I do this, therefore I'll see
yeah,
something, get
yeah.
something, and that will be it. Um, so, and quite often what would happen at sort of 5:15 is my son would wake up crying. He'd need his nappy change, and maybe my wife would get there first, or she was on night, she'd done the night shift. So I'd end up going up. I'd be like, oh, I've been disturbed again, from meditation. Let me go up, change a nappy. And but one day that the I was meditating and I heard the crying, and I opened my eyes and I went up and I changed the nappy, but I was still meditating. Like it was so obvious to me that, like, what have you been doing all this
Yeah,
time? I think it's Rupert Spira says, meditation is not something you do, it's something you are.
yes,
Um, and from that
yes,
point onwards, I was like, yeah, the the seeking of an experience in meditation and an end goal just fell away. I'd say just sometimes throughout the day, like if there's nothing happening, I just find myself with my eyes closed, but I'm not like, oh, I am like I'm not, on a cushion. I'm not saying, right, we'll do this for 20 minutes, or it just seems to be what's happening, but it there's no line between that and what was allegedly happening before and after. It's just that's just the river, if you like. It's just what the rivers happens to be doing it through this, It's weird.
yes, yes, yeah. I mean, yeah. As you said earlier, it's really hard to put into words, but it is kind of a cosmic joke when you start to see, you know, what the beliefs were and why, what you were trying to do, trying to get to, and all of those things. And it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note, I think we're pretty much at the end of our time together today. But before we go, I'd love you to let people know where they can find you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just look up Sonia on YouTube, and you should find some videos from me there on these kind of themes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Sonia. I really love this conversation. It's amazing how different our stories are, but how many kind of similarities there are with respect to waking up and seeing through the illusion.
Oh,
So
thank you. It's been a pleasure. My pleasure.
yes, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. If you enjoy this content, then let everybody know. And if you haven't subscribed, I would really appreciate if you subscribed. So thanks so much again. Have a great rest of the day and see you again soon. Bye.